Hello friends, in this video, we're going to discuss the strange disappearances of some of the people you'd most likely unexpect to go missing, park rangers. Now we're using parks as a broad term in the scope of this video, as it could include lands protected culturally or historically, including national parks, state parks, and other designated wildlife wilderness and recreational areas. Different countries use different names for this position. Warden is a favorite term in Canada, Ireland, and the United Kingdom. Within the United States, the National Park Service refers to the position as a park ranger. The U.S. Forest Service refers to the position as a forest ranger. Other countries use the term park warden or even game warden to describe this occupation. Now the profession includes a number of disciplines and specializations, and park rangers are often required to be proficient in more than one of the following: law enforcement, emergency response, firefighting, dispatch, scientist and scholar, maintenance, and administration. These individuals, particularly those in administration, are often heavily cross-trained in several of the aforementioned areas in order to allow for a knowledge of all other areas and duties under their authority. As a result, when people become lost or go missing in a park, the park rangers are usually the first ones on the scene to document the case and to start search and rescue efforts into motion. More than anyone, park rangers are very familiar with the missing person phenomena, which happens in parks around the world, and we're actually among the first to write about it. But what happens when one of these rangers themselves go missing? I invite you to join me now as we explore 5 strange cases of missing park rangers. With that said, let's begin. Number 1. Ranger Ralph W. Heath. Ralph W. Heath was a park ranger at Mare State Park in Maine, United States, who allegedly died of exposure while attempting to rescue a woman who was lost on Mount Katad in 1963. On Monday, October 28th of that year, 2 women, Helen Mower and Margaret Iesk, both from Concord and Massachusetts, took the Cathedral Trail and climbed back to PE on the mountain. They reached the summit and stopped to have lunch at around 1:30 in the afternoon. When the 2 friends decided to start their hike again and head back down, they had a small argument over the route Margaret wanted to take. Helen simply wanted to go back the way they came, but Margaret wanted to bushwhack, which very simply put means to leave the established trail, or get off the beaten path, as it were. Helen knew how risky this was, although Margaret had more hiking experience than she did not by much, and in only 3 years total, she thought it way too dangerous and stormed off to take Dudley Trail, which was the original trail they had taken to get there in the first place, and let her friend make her own mistakes and go her own way. It was a decision she would later regret. Very much Margaret, on the other hand, thought she was taking a shortcut and laughed off her friend's warnings, and they went their separate ways, agreeing to meet at the Chimney Pond lean-to. When Helen reached the final destination and saw there was no sign of Margaret, she decided to wait, but got very worried very quickly, though it was a nice and sunny day out. That day a nor'easter was blowing in, and the weather was about to very quickly take a turn for the worse. She started calling for Margaret at the headwell near and towards the mountain itself. She was pleasantly surprised when she heard her friend respond and started calling back. Despite the fact she was asking for help, Margaret yelled that she was not hurt, but was stuck in the treacherous terrain and wouldn't possibly be able to continue her turn back, and pleaded with Helen to go and get some help. This is when Helen made her way to the ranger station and encountered Ranger Ralph Heath having dinner. She explained the situation and Ralph immediately knew how dangerous that path was and how serious a problem they had. He was, however, thanking his lucky stars in his mind, at least that there hadn't been any snowfall, at least not yet. As any other year, for as far back as he could remember, there would have been snow covering the mountain. For weeks, at that point in the year, Ralph followed Helen back to Chimney Point and yelled out in the direction of Margaret and instructed her in a very calm and clear voice to stay where she was and not try to move or go anywhere. Help was on the way with the wind increasing. Like it was Ralph knew that the situation could go from scary to deadly. In a matter of just seconds, he had to act fast. He took Helen back to the ranger station and radioed his supervisor, Helen Taylor, and told him there was a hiker stranded in the upper basin on the mountain. Now a little background on Mr. Ralph Heath, to show what a brave man he was indeed, and how he was definitely not someone to shy away from trouble. He served in World War II and was honorably discharged. However, a house fire destroyed everything he owned with the clothes on his back, including his discharge papers. He was redrafted to serve in the Korean War. Before anyone could verify, he had already been discharged and had finished his service to the country. Ralph, however, went without hesitation to serve only for his wife to decide she didn't want to deal with another tour, especially one he shouldn't have had to have gone on and filed for divorce. So this was a man who was seeking solitude and peace in his life after all this tragedy and heartbreak, and he absolutely loved his job as a ranger and the beauty of the mountains, despite the weather outside becoming more and more perilous, and the orders from the supervising ranger that they had to wait until morning to attempt any kind of search and rescue. Ralph decided the risk to Margaret was too great. Leaving her out there all alone at night, snow was definitely coming, and a lot of it he decided to attempt to rescue himself. Despite it being nightfall and dark outside, the temperature had drastically dropped as well. He borrowed Helen's backpack and filled it with essentials such as food, a sleeping bag, water, a parka, and extra clothes. He also took 80 feet of rope, and at 11 p.m. that same night, headed alone down Dudley Trail. It wasn't until 5 hours later, at 4 in the morning, that he reported back to Helen. He told her he had spoken to Margaret about an hour after heading out, and was able to obtain her location when he again told her to stay put and assured her help was on the way. She reiterated she was uninjured but very cold. She's probably more than a little scared as well. I'm sure he told Helen that Margaret was near the waterfall and he wouldn't be able to reach her without more open and more people. This was an area that even ice climbers considered treacherous and dangerous. Ralph was also extremely concerned because Margaret was refusing to stay and wait for help to arrive, and was determined to find a way out herself for fear she would freeze to death before anyone would be able to rescue her. After reassuring Helen and telling her what was going on, he contacted his supervisor, Helen Taylor, and made him aware as well. Taylor dispatched the Maine Forest Service, 2 additional Mark Rangers, and a Maine game warden at 6 o'clock in the morning, Tuesday the 29th. An icy rain began to fall, and the wind had picked up drastically. Ralph Heath ate his breakfast and then informed Helen Mao of his plans. He was going to ascend the ravine from Chimney Pond, climb straight up the head wall and into the waterfall, where he would provide comfort to Barbara, and if he couldn't manage to rescue her himself, at least she wouldn't be scared and alone, and he would wait with her until the additional resources arrived to get them both out. Now, he was clearly putting himself at great risk, knowing It was unlikely he would be able to do anything but just sit with Margaret and wait. Yet, he did it anyway. He was truly a hero. While the plan was very reasonable, and despite being a chain smoker, Ralph was in great shape and a capable hiker and climber. However, he had hiked Dudley Trail 4 times in the last 24 hours, and it was a very strenuous and hard trail to get through. He was absolutely exhausted at this point and should have been doing any more hiking or climbing. Without getting so much needed rest, this would, after all, be a trail climb he was planning to make. He wasn't going to leave Margaret, however. So the admonishments and warnings from his co-workers and even Helen fell on deaf ears. Ralph reached Barbara just as Hurricane Jenny reached the mountain. He sat with her for a little while, and the two hunkered down. A ranger sergeant set out on foot towards Chimney Pond as well, and stated that by the time he got to just the basin, the conditions were white out. With gale force winds by noon, not even the jeeps could make it to the trailhead. There was 18 inches of snow already, and more falling fast. He even reported that only halfway up the mountain, his clothes had frozen solid and literally cracked at the elbows, having no visibility and facing merciless winds. Not to mention the condition of his clothing forced him back down the mountain. He stated he knew that both Ralph and Margaret were in some very serious trouble, as help could no longer get to them. It would be impossible for them to help themselves as well. The following morning, Wednesday, October 30th, 1963, Warden Supervisor David Priest returned to Roaring Brook and set up what we today call an Incident Command Center, and had at least 35 people there, working at all times. All different avenues of help were brought in and explored, but nobody could do anything as the snow was still accumulating. And fast on Friday morning, flashed forward to November 1st. Now been 5 full days since Margaret had gotten herself stuck, and 4 whole days since Ralph Heath had joined her to provide comfort and possible rescue, which we know now he was unable to do. On Saturday, November 2nd, all teams and persons involved decided that any rescue attempts were futile, that they were simply wasting resources. At that point, Mr. William L.O.L. Putnam III was one of the most experienced mountaineers in the country at the time, and had been helping with rescue efforts since Friday. Finally, on Sunday, November 3rd, he made the statement that he believed Ralph and Margaret had most likely died on Tuesday, and reiterated the waste of resources should they continue on this impossible track to try and save them. It wasn't until almost 6 months later, in April of 1964, that Margaret Iask's body was found and finally able to be brought down the mountain and sent home. Even at this time, though they needed chemical salts to melt the ice so as not to damage the corpse in any way, and the rescue still took an additional 3 days. It was found during the autopsy that Margaret was severely injured and hadn't survived more than a few hours due to the extreme blood loss. Her official cause of death was exsanguination. In other words, she bled out 2 weeks later on May 15th. They finally found Ralph's body. He was found, oddly enough, 400 feet above where Margaret was found. They airlifted him out of there, and his autopsy showed nothing at all. The coroner stated it looks as if he simply sat down and went to sleep, which is not uncommon when people freeze to death. Now, folks, though this was a bit of a long one, I think it's important we go over a few of the facts here first. If Margaret had died very quickly after getting stuck where she was, how was she yelling to Ralph hours later? She had saved an artery in her leg and would have bled out within in just minutes. Still, she was calling out and answering him hours after she initially got stuck. How is this even possible? She called out to Helen as well even before that, and we know neither one was under any kind of duress or sick at all. So they couldn't have been hallucinating. There were no other bodies found in the area that time, and no one else had come forward claiming to have been the person stuck up there and answering or calling for help. That could have been mistaken for Margaret. This is very strange, but becoming more and more common. Either search and rescue workers will hear the calls of people who are missing only to never be able to find the location where the calls are coming from, or the person who is stuck or lost will hear search and rescue but never seem to be able to find them. Either the weather coming on so suddenly and so strong all at once is another very familiar factor when talking about the missing. In the woods in the mountains, in fact, they were weeks late for any snow at all, and the weather started out that day as sunny and warm. This is just one of the many parameters we now look at while investigating the strange deaths and disappearances in the national parks. How and why did it all come on so suddenly, almost remarkably so? I guess we'll never know. But that doesn't stop us from investigating and pondering and searching for answers. In the truth, though, does it. Number 2, Ranger Randy Morganson. In July 1996, Ranger Randy Morganson was working as a backcountry ranger at Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks. He was the most ranger in the High Sierras, having been a backwoods ranger for 28 years. At that time, on this particular day, July 21st, 1996, Randy loaded his pack and went on his routine and regular patrol of his station. He was 64 years old and in almost perfect health. Some of his co-workers even thought he was invincible and impervious to the perils that came with a job. It was just about daybreak when he headed out to patrol near Bench Lake, taking nothing with him but an old ski pole to use as a hiking stick. He was never seen or heard from again. Now, as is often the case in these strange disappearances, a sudden rain started to fall, blew up out of nowhere, got rid of any footprints or other evidence as to where Ranger Randy could have possibly gone or what could have happened to him. Over the following days, there was plenty of frustration as dogs followed scents that seemed to abruptly stop, and random pieces of gear were found in several different locations, but none could be positively linked to Randy. A flare helicopter equipped with an infrared camera picked up a campfire burning on a hillside, but with no one in sight tending it. Eventually, the search was called off, with no sign of Randy or a body. Then a letter arrived at Randy and Judy Morganson's home in Sedona, Arizona. From Randy, Judy opened the letter and noted it had been postmarked 2 days after his apparent disappearance, since there is no postal service in the national park. Judy didn't understand just how Randy could have mailed the letter. That added to the suspicions that he had simply left the area to start a new life away from the National Park Service 13 days after Randy had been reported missing in early August 1996. The official search, which included helicopters, dog teams, and dozens upon dozens of volunteers, was called off. Not a single trace of Randy had been found, not even a footprint. Finally, in July 2001, 5 years after the search was called off for Randy, a 19-year-old member of a California Conservation Corps trail building crew ventured off trail and found some remains. The worker found some new evidence near a creek in a gorge in the Wide of Peak drainage, very near the outermost borders of the search area. Below the pools of a waterfall, rangers were called in to search and soon discovered a tattered shirt with Morganson's badge attached, then a backpack with a buckle fastened, and a boot on close examination of the single boot, which was half submerged in water. It had something white protruding from it, a leg bone. The boot and pack seemed to match the description of gear that Randy reportedly had been using that day. Teams for both investigation and recovery were flown in, and shortly after, a functioning park issue. Radio was discovered resting on top of the falls, not at the bottom. Like the other evidence, it was turned to the on position. This discovery confused matters even more. Although these remains seemed to confirm Randy had been in the mountains the whole time, investigators weren't certain whether this was where Randy had died. Rangers had remembered already searching the scourge and crossing at the exact spot where the radio was found. Retired Sierra Sub-District Ranger Alden Nash believes Morganson had fallen through a snow bridge and broken his leg, and his body had simply been hidden beneath ice throughout the search, weirdly, during the rescue attempt. In 1996, Randy's wife Judy had dreamed of a dead man floating in a lake. "I don't think it was an accident," says Eric Blam, author of The Last Season, a book about the disappearance of Randy Morganson, which is well worth a read, by the way. Blimp says Randy may have wanted to appear to have died on the job, just to make sure Judy, who was still his wife at the time, got the benefit from the government, a policy not honored in the case of taking one's own life. If he wanted to throw off the dogs or sucker people into believing something happened, he did a great job. Blim says, after so many years, with the bones nod, there's no way to say exactly what happened. The National Park Service named a peak in memory of Randy, the unofficial Mount Morganson. So named in his memory is the first peak west of Mount Russell, a half a mile away, and just north of Mount Whitney. Mount Morganson should be distinguished from the west peak of Mount Russell, the higher than Russell's twin summits, which are only separated by 1/10 of a mile. A summit registered with the name Mount Randy Morganson, 13,920 feet, was taken to the top by 2 park veterans in 2007. A peak bagger named Richard Patsky filed the original register missing when he climbed Mount Morganson on June 20th, 2008. He placed a temporary one that day and made a huge effort to return to the summit 1 week later. With a weatherproof ammo can and replacement journal, barely a handful of people, if any, sign it each year. Number 3, Ranger Brendan Unit, L.R. County, Colorado. Department of Natural Resources, Ranger Brendan Unit, 27 years old, went missing while out searching at night for a missing boater. Well, there have been nothing reported about the results of the initial missing person who Brendan was looking for. It seems a sudden high wind event caused him to capsize in his boat and die of what was officially said to be freshwater drowning. Now, folks, I'm no expert, but what I do know about is the strange weather events and causes of death that just don't fit the season or the profession the person in question was in, and I'm not the only one either. Many people are wondering how professional outdoorsmen could capsize and drown. And what about this so-called strange high wind event? Why does there always seem to be a sudden change in the weather during one of these missing persons encounters? These are the things many of us in this community wonder about after seeing case after case after case, the same thing over and over again, but never with any definitive or even sensical answers. Number 4, Ranger Jeff Christensen in July of 2005. Another seasonal park ranger died under mysterious circumstances in the same county Brendan Unit passed away in as well. Jeff Christensen was conducting a routine backcountry patrol of the Lake Lawn trailhead when he allegedly lost his footing and fell from Mummy's Range in Rocky Mountain National Park in Elmer County, Colorado. The search for the initially missing ranger lasted a little over a week, and he was found on August 6, 2005 by hiker. The official cause of death was a left temporal skull fracture that led to a subdural hematoma. The ranger has been said to have lost his footing and died of a tragic accidental fall. He only been on the job for 4 years and was survived by his parents. Now, is it possible for someone with at least 4 years' experience to die of something so simple? Could it be that there's something out there in our national parks and forests hunting these rangers perhaps or it wants to take out the people who are going to be able to help and possibly even save the other people? This mysterious predator or predators are trying to take out, we must keep searching for the truth. We owe it to all the people who die of something that is seemingly simple and accidental, but could very well be something much more sinister. Number 5, Ranger Paul Fugate here is yet another tragic account of a park ranger who vanished mysteriously while doing his job, never to be seen or heard from again. Now, Paul was known as a rebel and even anti-establishment, to a point he stayed for weeks at a time in a small cobblestone cabin on site at the monument. He was a naturalist who did small tasks such as answering the visitors' questions and putting together trail guides. Originally, Paul worked at the Navajo Monument in Arizona, but was transferred soon after being disciplined by one of his bosses about his laziness and slovenly appearance. Apparently, this supervisor admitted in a later report that he was annoyed he couldn't technically fire Paul, and also that he hated the hippies coming in to work for the monument. Paul was charged with stealing government equipment. When he took some hay home for his wife's horse, he was in an open relationship with his wife and sleeping with multiple women who were co-workers. While all of this may seem irrelevant, we must look at every aspect we can of a person's life when they go missing under such strange circumstances, especially when people in their profession are seemingly doing so at an alarming rate and have been for a while. Before he left his post that faithful day, he left instructions with the only other staff member there that if he wasn't back by a certain time for them to close up without him. He then walked out and down towards the area of land. The park was about to acquire one which was shrouded in problems. As there have been much conflict about the 400-acre purchase with the local Apache tribe, again he was never seen or heard from, and nobody has ever been found. Well, there you have it. What do you make of these strange disappearances of rangers who work and in some cases literally live in these parks, if they can go missing and leave no trace? What does that hold for the rest of us? Brightening, isn't it? I look forward to your thoughts in the comment section. Meanwhile, until we meet again, I'm Steve Stockton, and I'll talk to you next time.